What a lovely group. Beautiful.
Welcome, Jeff. It's a big pleasure to be with you here. And let's go straight to the conversation. So, what was the dream when that small ice cream store that Victor was talking about, what was that dream when you began the company with Ben Jerrys? Can you tell us a little bit more about the company? Probably many people know here what's the company about, but maybe you have those spicy stories that no one knows.
Well, the company opened its doors in 1978. And the big vision of the company was to have one little ice cream store, and that was it. That was the only vision it had. And it was started by two friends of mine, Ben and Jerry, who I knew. I met Ben working at a school in the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York. I had taken a job in this very special school with 25 students, and I was the bus driver, and Ben came and he was teaching crafts. Now, took this job as a bus driver. I had somehow managed to get a degree in business and a law degree at the same time, and I had to explain to my parents my career move of taking this job as a bus driver. And Ben came to work at the school. He and I became friends, and then they wanted to open up this ice cream store, and they asked me, because I had a degree in business, to help them. And so we got a business plan for a pizza parlor, and I gave it to them, and they took out the word pizza and put in the word ice cream, and they took out a number of ovens, and it became freezers, and number of slices became this. Now, the fact is, they didn't even know how to make ice cream. They took a $5 correspondence course, which in those days would be, now we would say that you take an online course to learn how to make ice cream, and they split the costs. And they're very proud, they spent $2.50 each to learn how to make ice cream, and it had no vision that this company would grow. It did not intend to grow. It was meant to have some fun and do some work in the local community. And it's so amazing for me to be here today with this idea that we're now in 35 countries all over the world, and that's what it began with. And I'm still connected to the company, and hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about it and some of the dilemmas and struggles of coming to work in the field of business from the background of being an activist before that.
So when Ben Jerrys was born, now you define the company as a social justice company. Back then, in 1977, was it a social justice company?
No, they were trying to figure out how to pay the bills. They were a struggling little entity, and what happened was that, and then sometimes they had to close the store. They put a sign in the window, we are closed today because we have to figure out what we're doing. So that was all part of this, process. And it was a couple of years later that they had worked so hard that they got burned out, and they decided to sell the company. They were going to sell the company and just get out. This was too hard. This was the 80 hours a week you do when you start something and trying to figure it out from scratch. And they decided to sell the company, and they got an offer for it. And before they went through with that offer, Ben changed his mind. And that's when he asked me to really get involved, besides just being a friend, but to get involved in the company. And Ben and Jerry's got sued by the people who wanted to buy it. They really wanted to buy the company. And Ben & Jerry's lost the lawsuit. And the lawsuit was for $100,000. And that's about the amount of money they had to run the business. And that when you lose a suit like this, the judge can say, you cannot use your bank account until you pay that off. But I ran to the bank faster than the sheriff got there. And I went to the bank president and I said, we have a problem. And he loved Ben & Jerry's. And I said, we have to take out all our money now and I have to take it out in cash. And he gave me $100,000 in cash. I put it in a paper bag and I flew out of the state of Vermont. And I got home and my lovely wife says, how was your trip? And I said, honey, I brought you something. And I brought it out on the bed. And so that's the story of a company that started more than 40 years ago. And I would I would just, before I get more into this, I just wanted to say how honored I am to be here and what it means for me as somebody who brought an activist consciousness to the world of business just because I was an activist before we got into this business or any business. And my dilemma about being a businessman only got resolved when I realized the power of business to make real change and to understand that it's more than writing a check to a charity. It's how you run the thing day to day. It's how you take care of the people in your company. It's how you deal with the community that you live in and work in and how you treat that. And all that is just part of kind of that emerged when we kept the company in about 1980, and we decided that, we can run this company any way we want. And it was this amazing moment of clarification to say, well, this is an opportunity for us to take our values and put it into our ice cream and put it into the way we ran it day to day.
We will go deeper on that, and we will discuss on how social justice and equality it's embedded in the company, but probably that path you have been through started many years ago, and you were telling me outside this stage that you, very young, you had ethical dilemmas. And probably those ethical dilemmas started to configure your mindset to create a social justice company. So can you tell us a little bit about those ethical dilemmas?
Sure. The ethical dilemma that I was saying, and by the way, I have mentioned this ethical dilemma to our translators here who yesterday, and I just also wanted to personally thank them for that incredible work that they do back there. My mind can't concentrate that well for that long period of time, and I just admire their ability to be able to focus on doing this, and I appreciate their work very much. But the ethical dilemma that I had back in that era, it was an ethical dilemma that I had in 1949. So that'll give you some idea how old I am. I was 6 years old at the time, and I remember this, and I'm still looking for advice on how I should have handled it. So after this, if you have a better idea than the way I handled it, I would appreciate your letting me know. So in the ethical dilemma, I was going to be traveling with my mother from upstate New York to Florida for a vacation and going on the train. And my mother told me that when I was on the train with her, I had to tell the conductor that I was 5 years old. because when you were 5 years old, you didn't have to pay. But this is the same mother that said, now always tell the truth. Don't lie. But when you're on the train, you know, this is what you have to do. And I remember this story from so clearly because she kept reminding me, and as it got closer to the time, I got tenser and tenser, and I didn't know what to say. My only hope was that the conductor would tell me, would not ask me that question, because I didn't have an answer. Well, as it happened, the conductor said, so, young man, how old are you? And what came out of my mouth was this. On the train, I'm 5, but at home, I'm 6. And so I promised to tell the truth here with everybody.
So, yeah, so you were telling me that that was your first important ethical dilemma, and then many years later, you joined the company. Then, as you said, it didn't start with a social justice dream, but now it is a well-known social justice company. This gathering, it's about the role of markets to solve climate crisis and inequality issues. So, what does it mean when you talk about social justice? What inequality issues are you addressing as a company? We have talked quite a lot on climate crisis. Inequality and climate crisis are totally interconnected. But if we can focus a bit more on inequality, because in Latin America, inequality is a huge issue. It's a huge issue. So could you talk a little bit more about that? What have you done in terms of inequality? And also, what can you do better? What should you do better as a company?
Sure, I'll do my best, but you said that inequality is a big issue in Latin America. In the country that I come from, it's a heck of a big issue, too. This is a global issue. It's incredible. Inequality in our country makes democracy impossible. And it's a fundamental right. And so one of the things that happened when Ben Jerrys and Ben decided to keep the company and Jerry stayed engaged in it also, is the very first thing we did was to come up with this idea that I read about. It comes from a cooperative in Spain called Mondragon. People may know and have heard of that cooperative. But it says that there should be a ratio in a company between the top level people who get how much they're getting paid and how much everybody else is getting paid in the company. So I mentioned this to Ben, and you know, we were always so thoughtful and strategic, which is not really true. Ben said, well, that's an interesting idea. And he said, maybe we should do it here. And I said, yes. And then the Mondragon had a 3-to-1 ratio. And so we said, what should our ratio be? And I said, well, how about 5-to-1? And we said, yes. And we created a 5-to-1 salary ratio where nobody could get paid more than 5 times what anybody else made. Now, the important part of that is it ties your whole organization together. That if you're one of the, have a title or president or something, the only way you start to do better financially is if everybody else in the organization does better financially.
What was the size of the company on the 5-1 ratio? What was the size of the company at that moment?
The size of the company was very small. You know, it was a time that I remember where you knew everybody's name who worked there, and you knew when you ran into them in the hall or something, you knew about their family and their kids, and it was that size of the company. And that's when we decided to implement this ratio as an important part. And so that was just the beginning. Another thing we did was because we needed to raise money to build a plant. We were growing, and we were growing a lot, and people were coming into work, that we needed to raise money to build this ice cream plant and expand. And so one of the ways we raised money is we sold part of the company to the community, to Vermonters. Now, we were given advice, you can't do that. It'll be a big problem. You shouldn't do it. And we made it a very small, you could buy into the company for a very little bit of money. And they said, oh, it'll be too expensive. You'll have shareholders. You'll have to have shareholders meetings. And we said, no, this is what we wanted to do. So we sold part of the company to the community in Vermont. And then everybody said, oh, and it was successful. And everybody said, after we did it, said, you guys are geniuses. The people that own your company are your customers. How brilliant is that? So, it was one of those things that we just did from a fairness point of view. But this became the company, part of the folks who were our customers were also some of the owners. And then you had to have stockholders meetings. So once a year, we did a 2-day music festival for our shareholders, and it became the biggest thing that would happen in Vermont. 3,000 families became owners, which was a lot it's a small state. And when we had these events, all the politicians wanted to come because it was the biggest gathering in Vermont. It was a half-hour shareholders meeting and then a 2-day music festival that we did, and it was full of fun. And we started to do interesting political awareness stuff. So we were very committed to being a company that challenged the United States military budget, which was about, at that time, was $350 billion. Now, one of the important facts from the United States is that if you are a person who was born in the United States, there's about a 90% chance that when you were born, the United States was at war. And so that's part of our U.S. culture. We are always at war. That is just a daily life. You have a cup of coffee in the morning, the United States is at war somewhere in the globe. And so we felt as a company, we wanted to challenge that. That was part of our social justice stuff. So we started to take out big ads in the newspaper. This is before, the social media. There was newspapers. And we took these full-page ads out against the Iraq War. We started something called 1% for Peace. 1% was to say, let's take 1% of the Defense Department's budget and use it for peace through understanding. 1% of it would have been a little over $3 billion. Now, everybody said, they'll never give it to you. And of course they were right, because we were asking for $3 billion to be given to Ben, Jeff, and his friends to figure out what to do with. And, we didn't really expect it to happen, but it was the consciousness raising it. And then we came out with products called 1% for Peace. And they talked about, the role of trying to push back against a U.S. military budget in a country that was always at war. Those were just some of the ways initially that we started to do this. And we felt this was our responsibility. Our responsibility came from, once you know and understand an issue, if you choose to do nothing, you're just as guilty as anybody else, because you're held accountable once you know and understand it. And we felt that this was just our role as a business. And the more we seemed to do this, the more people loved our company. And sometimes people, because of some of the things we did, hated our company. And we did get mail saying we're boycotting your company, but we were always willing to take that risk.
So, one of the causes you have as well, and we were talking before, it's about gender equality and your commitment with the LGBTQI community. So you were president of the board of Ben Jerrys for 10 years. You have been in the board much more years, and you were telling me about your succession. You're leaving the board now. So what does it have to do with gender and LGBTQI communities?
Well, so we have this, we feel that our partnerships and our reaching out into the communities where we do business is for any groups that are marginalized. And that's been a core value of the company since its inception. And I'll get to your question in a second, but just to set this up a little bit, we also have a Ben Jerrys Foundation that gives a certain percentage of our profit away. And as I said, charity, we learned right away that it's really how you run your business rather than write a check, which I mentioned before. But when the decision makers who decide where their money goes, I'm a trustee of the foundation as well, and so is Jerry, but the people who make the decision are the men and women who work in our company, who work in our plants. And one of the important things we decided to do, and this is 25 years ago, 30 years ago, we began to say people in our company need to understand and learn about the struggles that so many folks in the planet have. And you can do some learning by reading and some learning by videos, but we want to take the people who work in our company out in the world and out of the office buildings and out of the plants. And so we do these annual learning journeys. And I actually, in October, will be doing another one with about 25 to 30 employees of Ben Jerrys who are the decision makers in our foundation. It's all focused on these issues. We will be in the South in the United States where they're learning more about civil rights and the struggles of people of color. And we will be in Montgomery, Alabama, where it was the boycott, the Martin Luther King boycott. We'll be there. Then we go to New Orleans, and we were taking our employees. Everybody's agreed to do this. We're going on a little bike ride of 11 miles along a strip of land called Cancer Alley. Cancer Alley is a place where low-income people of color live, and it's also full of refineries and a high incidence of cancer in the United States, and it's now bringing in a big plastic company. So we want to make sure that our employees are engaged in all these issues. And so the issues that you referred to, we have said we are committed to same-sex marriage as a right, as a human right, and we have been advocating for it in all the countries that we are in, especially when there is a legal struggle of trying to make it happen. And sometimes there's fairly pushback. And so we have been doing this. In terms of the transition, my time on the board, I woke up about 4.5 years ago one morning, and I said to myself, what can I do next in my role as chair of the board of directors? And the only thing that came to mind was to leave. And that's a pretty strange thing to say. This is the best thing I could come up with, leave? And I began to think about it, and I began to understand that, I'm 76 now, and I began to understand that the most important thing I could do for the company, it was to leave, and it was to make sure that the people who came in after me continued on with this legacy. So that began in that began in 2014, and I said I picked a date, and I picked a date when the company was 40 years old, and I was going to be turning 75. So I left about a year, a little over a year, and I was able to make this happen in a way that I feel so proud of. One of the proudest things I think I've done is to turn this over. And the new chair of Ben & Jerrys, well, she's been a chair for a year, a little over a year, is a woman of color. The vice chair is a woman. It's not, so this is not a one-off. This is a real change. The predominant people on our board are women, and that has all changed because, you know, we were just three guys. It was Ben, Jerry, and I was hanging out with them, so it was their company, and to make this transition. And she is a very, very powerful force. I recruited her. She's an internationally known figure. I recruited her because of her courage of the way she speaks out about land and inequality in the world. And it has led us to do some amazing things. She was one of the people who we signed recently a cutting-edge agreement with our farmers where we buy and get our dairy from, requiring them to pay a living wage to all the dairy workers and to have high standards for the dairy workers who mostly come from Mexico and Guatemala. And they now have a grievance procedure that the farmers, if we're going to buy your milk, you have to agree to this. And we as a company will pay extra for that. We say we understand the struggles of small farmers, but it's our responsibility as a company to go out and take care of the workers as well.
Excellent. So we have 3 minutes. We have 3 minutes before we make a very important announcement.
Oh, I'm having so much fun, really.
I need you to answer 2 key questions. So most of people know that Ben & Jerrys was acquired by Unilever 20 years ago. So you have been talking about all the social justice elements that the company has, and it's been within those 20 years as well. So how did you maintain the values? How did you maintain this vision of Ben & Jerrys, even if it was acquired by Unilever? And you told me before that you didn't want to sell the company. So how was that? How have you preserved that?
So this is a good kind of ending to this little part because it's a lot connected to the creation of the B movement. But when we didn't want to sell, we really fought to sell for 18 months, and lawyers were all over the place running around and telling folks what they had to do, and we ended up being forced to sell to Unilever. But we created an agreement. There's never been one like it, and there's never been one since, that establishes the board that I was on for the last 20 years, you know, and I'd been on the original board as well. And this agreement gives our board power in perpetuity. In other words, this agreement cannot be broken. And it gives our board the rights to insist on specific issues around what the company is going to do. And this board has complete control over the social mission of our company and is doing it to maintain that. It has control over the quality of the product. Unilever cannot mess around with the quality of the product, and they must continue to do this, our social mission as we describe it in the world. So this isn't a marketing tool. This isn't anything else. This is, when I look at as a social justice company, I get a little queasy because I'm not sure yet, and I don't even believe that we can really call ourselves a social justice company because there's so many more things that we need to get engaged in. But this board has been existing now for 20 years. And it turns out, ironically, that Ben & Jerrys has been maybe the most, but at least one of the most successful companies financially that it ever purchased. And they now start talking about, we're going to buy more purpose-led companies and everything else. And I always say, well, you know, if you buy it for the reason that you're going to make more money from it, you'll fail because you won't be doing it and you won't challenge it. And lastly, I'll just end with, because it was one of the most important things in the negotiations at the very end. An issue for me is how employees are treated in our company. You know, we may have this great vision where you all say, oh, Ben & Jerry's is great, blah, 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 all that stuff. But if we're not looking internally in our company of what we're doing, we're not doing it right. And so at the very end of the negotiations, I asked my colleagues, and I said, I want to go in and ask Unilever for one more thing, and that's the way our employees were treated. We're going to be treated and actually compensated for, because it's a deep issue for me. And Unilever agreed to pay all our employees a living wage that was based on the same kind of formula we had. And I was feeling really good about that, and then I said, well, I want the rights to sue Unilever if they don't do it, and they agreed to that in writing. And then I said, wow, this is going very well. I said to myself, then Unilever, you have to pay my legal costs if I sue you because you're such a big company. And they agreed to that. And because they agreed to that, they've been following through with it completely. So thank you very much.
So, hold on. This is a yes, no, or maybe answer. This is a yes, no, or maybe answer. You have three options. So basically, as we hear you, you have said that the strategy of Unilever of becoming a more purpose-driven company has been the acquirement of B Corps, for instance, and they have bought 7 B Corps already, large companies like yours. So you think with that strategy, Unilever is changing? Yes, no, or maybe?
Yes, it's changing. To
Right.
answer the question the way you wanted, and I won't go. No, but not that you wanted the yes answer, but to add one word. And I'm happy to do a more in-depth answer to anyone who wants to know. But I do believe they're changing, and I do believe they're trying to change. But I just believe that it's a complicated thing to change a ship that big where it's not embedded in the DNA of how it began.
Excellent. Please don't leave. We have an important announcement. So, thanks so much, Jeff. You cannot leave. So, here we have the blocks of the Sustainable Development Goals, the Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible. And Unilever, Ben & Jerrys, has been totally engaged with the SDGs as well. And today we want to do an important announcement. So please show the video, and I will invite Marcel Fukayama, the Executive Director of Sistema International, to sign his first signature as new Executive Director of this very important moment.